I'm Harper Collins, 24 years old, and I thought the worst betrayal came from strangers. I was wrong. The call that shattered my world came from my own mother on a Tuesday morning in March. Harper, we're withdrawing your college funding until you apologize to your brother and admit what you did. What I did was catch their golden boy, my twin brother Blake, selling fake transcripts to desperate students. But apparently in my family, telling the truth makes you the villain. Before we dive into this unbelievable journey, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you've ever felt like the black sheep in your family, or had someone try to gaslight you, this story will hit close to home. Hit that like button if you're ready for a wild ride, and don't forget to subscribe because trust me, you won't want to miss how this insane family drama unfolds. Now let me take you back to where this nightmare began. 3 months before that devastating phone call, I was living what I thought was my best life at Columbia University. As a pre-med student with a 3.9 GPA, I had worked my ass off to get where I was. Every night spent studying organic chemistry, every weekend sacrificed for volunteer work at the hospital. Every dollar earned from my part-time job at the registrar's office was an investment in my dream of becoming a doctor. My twin brother Blake, on the other hand, seemed to coast through his business major with a 2.1 GPA, and somehow always had money for designer clothes and expensive dinners. Working at the registrar's office gave me access to student records, and I took that responsibility seriously. I processed transcript requests, verified graduation requirements, and helped students navigate academic policies. It was routine work until that Friday afternoon in December, when I noticed something odd. A transcript request for Blake had been processed 3 times in the past month, each time with different GPAs listed. The first showed his actual 2.1, the second showed 3.5, and the third showed an impossible 3.8 with honors notations he had never earned. My stomach dropped as I dug deeper into the system. Blake wasn't just altering his own records. He was running a sophisticated operation selling fake transcripts to desperate students for $5,000 each. I found evidence of forged university letterheads, doctored GPAs, and signatures that looked official but were completely fabricated. The scope was staggering. Over 30 students had purchased altered academic records in the past semester alone, and Blake was making more money than most entry-level professionals. The investigation revealed Blake's network included his wealthy roommate Trevor, and a corrupt graduate student assistant who provided access to official university seals and administrative passwords. They had turned academic fraud into an art form, complete with fake professor recommendations and fabricated extracurricular achievements. Students who were failing out bought new identities as honor roll scholars, while Blake pocketed enough money to fund his lavish lifestyle. But the betrayal cut deeper than I initially realized. Blake had been stealing scholarship money that was meant to be shared between us as twins. Our parents had established a fund specifically for both of our educations, and Blake had been siphoning money from my portion to finance his criminal enterprise. While I worked 20 hours a week to pay for textbooks and meal plans, Blake was living like a trust fund baby on money that belonged to me. When I confronted him in his dorm room, surrounded by expensive electronics and designer furniture I now knew he couldn't afford, Blake's reaction was everything I feared it would be. He didn't show remorse, guilt, or even surprise. Instead, he laughed in my face and called me jealous and pathetic. "You think Mom and Dad will believe their perfect son would do something like this?" he sneered, gesturing to the evidence I had printed out. "You're just the bitter twin who can't handle that I'm more successful than you." Blake's threats weren't empty posturing. He knew exactly where to hit me where it would hurt most. "I could destroy your pre-med dreams with one phone call," he said, his voice cold and calculating. "Who do you think the admissions committees will believe when I tell them about your jealous delusions and unstable behavior?" The way he said it, with such casual cruelty, made me realize this wasn't the first time he had manipulated people close to him. This was Blake's true nature, and I had been blind to it for 24 years. As I left his room with the evidence tucked under my arm, Blake called after me with words that would prove prophetic. "Mom and Dad will never believe their golden boy would do this. But go ahead and try. See what happens when you try to destroy the family favorite." The confidence in his voice should have warned me about what was coming. But I was naive enough to believe that truth and evidence would speak for themselves. I was about to learn the hardest lesson of my life about family loyalty and the power of manipulation. The drive to our parents' Connecticut estate took 2 hours, and I spent every minute rehearsing how I would present Blake's crimes. I organized the evidence meticulously. Printed emails between Blake and his accomplices, screenshots of the fraudulent transcripts, financial records showing the suspicious deposits into his accounts, and a detailed timeline of the operation. I was confident that once my parents saw the proof, they would understand the gravity of the situation and ensure Blake faced appropriate consequences. Our family home sat on 3 acres of manicured property, a testament to my father Robert's success as a commercial real estate developer. My mother Diane had transformed the interior into something out of Architectural Digest, complete with imported Italian marble and original artwork. It was the perfect setting for the life they had built, and Blake had always been the perfect son to complete their picture of family success. The dinner conversation started normally enough. Dad discussed his latest development project while Mom shared news about her charity fundraising events. Blake played his part perfectly, asking thoughtful questions about the business and praising Mom's organizational skills. He was charming, engaged, and gave no indication that he was running a criminal enterprise from his dorm room. When I finally presented the evidence, the reaction was immediate and devastating. Before my father even looked at the documents, he was shaking his head and defending Blake. "Harper, I don't know what this is about, but Blake would never do such things. You're obviously jealous of his success and trying to sabotage his future." The dismissal was so swift and complete that I wondered if he had even heard what I was saying. My mother's response was even more crushing. She revealed that Blake had been preparing them for this moment, telling them I had been acting strangely and making up stories about him. "Blake warned us you might try something like this," she said, her voice filled with disappointment rather than concern. "He's been worried about your mental state for weeks. This jealous behavior isn't like you, Harper." Blake's performance was masterful. As I spread the evidence across the dining room table, he examined each piece with what appeared to be genuine confusion and hurt. Tears actually formed in his eyes as he spoke about how devastating it was to be accused by his own twin sister. "I don't understand why Harper is doing this," he said, his voice breaking at just the right moment. "I've been trying to help her with her stress about medical school applications, and this is how she repays me." The announcement of my financial punishment came like a physical blow. My parents declared they were transferring my college fund to Blake as compensation for the emotional damage I had caused him. 24 years of trust, love, and family bonds were shattered in a single evening because Blake had convinced them that I was the problem. The scholarship I had worked so hard to earn was mysteriously rejected the next week, and I later learned that Blake had sabotaged my application through his connections in the administration. As the evening deteriorated, Blake's mask slipped just enough for me to see the satisfaction in his eyes when our parents weren't looking. He leaned over during Mom's impassioned speech about family loyalty and whispered, "I told you they'd never believe you. You should have minded your own business." The casual cruelty of his words, delivered while our parents defended him passionately, showed me exactly who my twin brother really was. I left that house knowing my family had chosen sides, and I wasn't on the winning team. The drive back to campus was a blur of tears and disbelief. How had Blake anticipated my move so perfectly? How long had he been poisoning our parents against me? Most importantly, how was I going to prove the truth when the people who should trust me most had already decided I was lying? The next few days brought a series of small but significant betrayals that showed Blake's preparation had been thorough. My campus ID was temporarily suspended due to suspicious activity that I later learned Blake had reported. My academic advisor received an anonymous tip about my unstable behavior and scheduled a mandatory counseling session. Even my roommate started asking if I was okay, mentioning that someone who cares about me had expressed concern about my mental health. Blake wasn't just content with winning. He wanted to destroy me completely, and he was using my own family as weapons against me. Returning to campus after that disastrous family dinner felt like entering enemy territory. Blake had used the weekend to spread his version of events, painting me as an unstable sister having a breakdown due to academic pressure. Students who had been friendly before now avoided eye contact, and I could hear whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when I approached. Blake's influence extended further than I had imagined, and he was using every connection to isolate me socially and academically. My determination to expose the truth intensified rather than diminished. If my family wouldn't listen to evidence, I would gather so much proof that Blake's guilt became undeniable. I started by mapping out his entire operation, documenting every fraudulent transcript, every fake recommendation letter, and every suspicious financial transaction. The registrar's office became my command center after hours, where I could access records and cross-reference data without interference. The breakthrough came when I befriended Bethany, Trevor's ex-girlfriend who had been unceremoniously dumped when she started asking too many questions about his sudden wealth. Bethany was a psychology major with a keen eye for manipulation tactics, and she had been documenting Trevor's suspicious behavior for weeks before their relationship ended. I knew something was wrong when he started paying for everything in cash. She told me over coffee at a secluded corner of the library. When I asked where the money was coming from, he got violent. Really violent. Bethany's information revealed that Blake's operation was far more extensive than I had initially discovered. They weren't just selling altered transcripts to Columbia students. They were running a network that included 3 other universities in New York and New Jersey. The operation had generated over $200,000 in the past year, making it a serious federal crime rather than simple academic misconduct. Blake had been planning to expand to schools in Boston and Philadelphia, treating education fraud like a legitimate business venture. The most chilling discovery came when Bethany showed me text messages between Trevor and Blake discussing contingency plans if their operation was exposed. Blake had been planning to frame me from the very beginning, using my access to the registrar's office as the perfect scapegoat. If anyone gets suspicious, we pin it on Harper, one message read. She's got the access and the motive. Perfect fall guy. The premeditation was breathtaking in its calculated cruelty. My investigation revealed that Blake had been blackmailing professors with fabricated evidence of academic misconduct. Dr. Patterson from the English department had been coerced into writing fake recommendation letters after Blake threatened to accuse him of sexual harassment. Professor Chen from the economics department had been pressured into providing early access to exam questions after Blake planted evidence suggesting she was sharing grades for financial gain. The web of corruption and manipulation was destroying innocent people's careers to protect Blake's criminal enterprise. The frame job Blake had been preparing became active when campus security showed up at my dorm room with a search warrant. They found stolen answer keys to 3 different exams hidden in my textbooks, keys I had never seen before but which bore my fingerprints thanks to Blake's careful placement. The hearing was scheduled for the following week, and suddenly my own academic future was in jeopardy while Blake's crimes remained hidden behind a wall of manipulation and lies. Blake's offer to help clear my name came with conditions that revealed the depth of his sociopathy. He visited me in my dorm room the night after the search, playing the concerned brother worried about my future. "I can make this all go away," he said, sitting on my bed like we were still children sharing secrets. "I have influence with the administration, and I can convince them this was all a misunderstanding. But you need to stop this investigation nonsense and apologize to our parents for the lies you told about me." The casual way he admitted to framing me while offering to fix the problem he had created showed Blake's complete lack of empathy or remorse. He wasn't just a criminal. He was a predator who enjoyed watching people suffer. And he was my twin brother, someone I had shared a womb with and grown up beside for 24 years. The evidence I was gathering painted a picture of systematic corruption that extended far beyond simple grade changes. Blake wasn't just a college student making bad choices. He was the leader of a criminal organization that was destroying the integrity of multiple educational institutions. And he was using our family's trust and love as shields to protect himself from consequences. The academic hearing was a masterclass in manipulation that would have been impressive if it wasn't destroying my life. The disciplinary committee consisted of 5 faculty members and 2 student representatives, all of whom had been subtly influenced by Blake's campaign of whispers and suggestions about my mental instability. Dean Morrison, who had known our family for years through my father's donations to the university, presided over the proceedings with what appeared to be genuine sadness about my fall from grace. Blake's testimony was the centerpiece of the hearing, and watching him perform was like witnessing a sociopath's greatest hits compilation. He spoke about his growing concern for my mental health, citing specific examples of erratic behavior that were either completely fabricated or grossly misrepresented. When he described finding me crying in the library after receiving a B+ on a chemistry exam, he painted it as evidence of dangerous perfectionism rather than normal student stress. His voice cracked with emotion as he talked about his desperate attempts to get me help before I did something that would ruin my future. The stolen answer keys were presented as evidence of my academic desperation, with Blake reluctantly admitting that he had noticed me spending unusual amounts of time in the registrar's office after hours. "I thought she was just being dedicated," he said, his performance so convincing that I almost believed it myself. "I never imagined she would steal exam materials. This isn't the sister I grew up with." The committee members nodded sympathetically, completely taken in by his act. My attempts to present evidence of Blake's fraud were dismissed as desperate deflection attempts by someone facing serious academic consequences. When I showed transcripts of conversations between Blake and his accomplices, the committee suggested I might have fabricated them using my computer skills. When I presented financial evidence of suspicious deposits into Blake's accounts, they implied I was violating privacy laws by accessing information without authorization. Every piece of legitimate evidence became proof of my unstable behavior rather than Blake's crimes. The academic probation was devastating enough, but Blake's real masterstroke came when our parents arrived on campus the next day. He had called them immediately after the hearing, describing my breakdown with such convincing detail that they drove straight from Connecticut to stage an intervention. My mother was crying before she even saw me, convinced that her daughter had suffered some kind of psychotic break that led to criminal behavior. My father's disappointment was perhaps the most painful aspect of the entire ordeal. This was a man who had taught me to value integrity and hard work, who had been proud of my academic achievements and career ambitions. Seeing him look at me with a mixture of sadness and disgust was worse than any punishment the university could have imposed. "We raised you better than this, Harper," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Blake is devastated by what you've done, and frankly, so are we." Blake's suggestion of a psychological evaluation was presented as loving concern for a troubled family member, but I recognized it as another move in his chess game. He had researched psychiatric holds and involuntary commitments, and he was laying the groundwork to have me declared mentally incompetent if his other tactics failed. The family therapist he recommended, Dr. Whitmore, had been carefully chosen for her willingness to diagnose patients based on family testimony, rather than direct examination. The financial pressure Blake orchestrated was designed to force me into submission through economic desperation. My parents froze all access to family funds, including the emergency credit card I had carried since high school. My campus job was terminated due to the academic probation, and suddenly I couldn't afford basic necessities like food and toiletries. Blake's girlfriend Katie helped spread rumors about my instability through social media, ensuring that potential sources of support were warned away from my dangerous behavior. The isolation was perhaps the most effective weapon in Blake's arsenal. My roommate moved out after receiving anonymous warnings about my violent tendencies, leaving me alone in a double room I couldn't afford. Friends who had been supportive initially began to distance themselves as Blake's whisper campaign gained momentum. Even professors who had praised my work started treating me with careful professionalism, rather than the warmth I had previously experienced. Blake's physical threat allegations marked a new escalation in his campaign against me. He reported to campus security that I had confronted him aggressively outside the library, claiming I had grabbed his arm and threatened to make him pay for testifying truthfully at my hearing. The security footage from that evening mysteriously malfunctioned, but Blake's bruises were photographed and documented. I later learned he had inflicted them on himself using techniques he had researched online. The restraining order Blake obtained painted me as a dangerous individual, who posed a threat to her own twin brother's safety. The legal document described me as unstable and prone to violent outbursts, creating an official record of mental illness that would follow me for years. Campus security was instructed to monitor my movements and report any attempts to contact Blake or his associates. Watching Blake's master plan unfold was like being trapped in a nightmare, where everyone around me had been convinced that black was white and up was down. He had weaponized our parents' love, the university's authority, and the legal system itself to destroy me while protecting his criminal enterprise. And the most terrifying part was how easily everyone had believed him. The official withdrawal from Columbia came with a letter that felt like a death sentence for all my dreams. My parents had used their influence with Dean Morrison to arrange what they called a medical leave of absence. But everyone understood it was an expulsion disguised as concern for my mental health. The official reason cited my need for psychological intervention and family support during a difficult period of emotional instability. 24 years of academic achievement were erased with bureaucratic language that made my educational destruction sound like a favor. Moving out of the dorm under the watchful eyes of campus security was a humiliation designed to be as public as possible. Blake had ensured that word of my departure spread through our social circles, painting it as a necessary intervention for someone who had become dangerous and unpredictable. Students I had studied with for years watched from windows as I loaded my belongings into boxes, their expressions ranging from pity to fear based on the stories Blake had circulated about my breakdown. Dr. Martinez, my organic chemistry professor, was the only faculty member who offered me shelter during this catastrophic period. She had noticed the dramatic change in my academic performance and demeanor, recognizing the signs of someone being systematically destroyed rather than someone experiencing a natural psychological decline. Her small apartment near campus became my sanctuary, a place where I could plan my next moves without Blake's surveillance network monitoring my every action. The staged intervention was Blake's piece de resistance, a carefully orchestrated performance designed to convince everyone present that I was mentally ill and potentially dangerous. Our parents flew in the family therapist Dr. Whitmore, who had agreed to conduct an evaluation based on secondary information rather than proper clinical assessment. The living room of Dr. Martinez's apartment became a tribunal where my entire family sat in judgment of my delusional behavior and fabricated accusations against Blake. Dr. Whitmore's diagnosis of delusional disorder with paranoid features was predetermined and designed to justify involuntary psychiatric commitment. She described my accusations against Blake as elaborate paranoid fantasies created by my subconscious to cope with academic failure and family disappointment. The fact that I had maintained my innocence and continued to present evidence was cited as proof of my inability to accept reality, rather than persistence in telling the truth. The psychiatric facility. My parents wanted to commit me to specialized in treating young adults who had experienced academic and social breakdowns. The brochures they showed me featured serene gardens and therapeutic activities, but I recognized it for what it truly was. A place to disappear inconvenient family members who threatened carefully constructed narratives. Blake had researched the facility specifically because it had a reputation for long-term commitments and minimal contact with the outside world. My medical school interview cancellations arrived in a cascade of polite but devastating emails. Admissions committees had been contacted by concerned parties who shared information about my character concerns and recent psychological evaluation. 24 years of preparation for a medical career were destroyed in a matter of weeks, with each rejection letter citing my need to address personal issues before pursuing such a demanding profession. The extended family betrayal was orchestrated with surgical precision by Blake, who reached out to aunts, uncles, and cousins with carefully crafted stories about my mental breakdown and the family's efforts to get me help. Holiday invitations were rescinded, graduation celebrations were canceled, and lifelong relationships were severed based on Blake's version of events. Even my 90-year-old grandmother, who had been one of my strongest supporters, was convinced that I needed professional help to recover from my delusions. My boyfriend Cameron's breakup was delivered with the kind of clinical detachment that suggested Blake had coached him on the conversation. "I can't be with someone who might be dangerous," Cameron said. his words sounding rehearsed and hollow. Your brother showed me the police reports and the psychiatric evaluation. I think you need to focus on getting better instead of being in a relationship. 5 years of love and support evaporated because Blake had poisoned even my most intimate relationship. The darkest moment came on a Tuesday evening when the weight of complete isolation and systematic destruction finally overwhelmed my ability to cope. Sitting alone in Dr. Martinez's apartment, surrounded by evidence that no one would believe and facing a future that Blake had systematically demolished, I found myself researching methods and locations for ending the nightmare permanently. The bottle of sleeping pills in the medicine cabinet seemed like a reasonable solution to an impossible situation. Dr. Martinez's intervention came at exactly the right moment, when I was sitting on her bathroom floor with the bottle open in my hands. She didn't lecture me about the value of life, or try to minimize the magnitude of what Blake had done to me. Instead, she sat beside me on the cold tiles and said, "He doesn't get to win by driving you to this. We're going to destroy him with the truth, but we need you alive to do it." Her practical approach to my despair somehow reached me when inspirational speeches would have failed. Blake's victory visit the next evening revealed the depth of his sadistic satisfaction with my destruction. He arrived at Dr. Martinez's apartment with flowers and crocodile tears, playing the concerned brother role for any neighbors who might be watching. Once inside, his mask dropped completely. "You should have minded your own business," he said, examining the sparse apartment with obvious satisfaction. "Look where your righteousness got you. No school, no family, no future. Was it worth it to try to destroy me?" The casual cruelty of his words was matched by his detailed knowledge of every aspect of my downfall. Blake knew about the medical school rejections before I did, had orchestrated the family betrayals with precision, and had even influenced Cameron's decision to break up with me. He had spent months planning my complete social and academic destruction, while playing the loving brother to perfection. As Blake prepared to leave, secure in his victory and my apparent defeat, he made one crucial mistake. His gloating included details about his criminal operation that I hadn't previously discovered, including hints about violence he had used against students who threatened to expose him. In his arrogance and satisfaction, Blake revealed information that would become the foundation for bringing him down. He thought I was finished, but he had just handed me the weapons I needed to destroy him. Dr. Martinez's introduction to investigative journalist Sophia Chen came at exactly the moment when I needed to believe that justice was still possible in a world that seemed completely controlled by Blake's manipulation. Sophia specialized in exposing corruption in educational institutions, and she had been tracking unusual patterns in academic fraud cases across multiple universities for the past 2 years. Her interest in my case wasn't just professional. She had a personal connection to academic fraud, after watching her younger brother's life destroyed by false accusations that were never properly investigated. Our first meeting took place in a small coffee shop 20 miles from campus, chosen specifically because Blake's surveillance network wouldn't expect me to travel that far for a simple conversation. Sophia's approach was methodical and professional, asking detailed questions about Blake's operation while taking careful notes and recording our conversation with my permission. She explained that academic fraud rings often operated across state lines, making them federal crimes that attracted serious investigative resources when properly documented. The revelation that Blake's operation connected to a larger criminal network was both terrifying and validating. Sophia had identified suspicious patterns at universities across the Northeast, including unusual numbers of transcript alterations, grade changes that benefited specific students, and financial irregularities in scholarship distributions. Blake wasn't just running a local scam. He was part of a sophisticated organization that treated education fraud as a profitable business model with multiple revenue streams. Sophia's investigation had uncovered evidence of money laundering through fake charity organizations that claimed to provide educational assistance to underprivileged students. Blake had been funneling his fraud profits through these fictional nonprofits, creating tax advantages while building a legitimate-seeming explanation for his sudden wealth. The operation was sophisticated enough to fool bank investigators and tax authorities for several years. My computer skills, developed through years of pre-med coursework and work in the registrar's office, proved invaluable for uncovering the digital evidence that Sophia needed to build her case. Together, we accessed encrypted communications between Blake and his accomplices using techniques I had learned in my computer science electives. The messages revealed a level of criminal sophistication that went far beyond simple grade changes, including plans for identity theft and document forgery that could affect thousands of students. Sophia's introduction to FBI agent David Park marked the moment when my personal nightmare became a legitimate federal investigation. Agent Park had been building a case against educational fraud networks for 3 years, following financial trails and communication patterns that led directly to Blake's operation. My evidence provided the missing pieces he needed to secure warrants and begin surveillance operations against the entire criminal network. The discovery that Blake had been selling complete fake degrees rather than just altered transcripts revealed the true scope of his criminal enterprise. Students who had never attended college were purchasing entire academic identities, complete with transcripts, recommendation letters, and even fake graduation ceremonies. The operation threatened the integrity of higher education itself, undermining the value of legitimate degrees, and deceiving employers who trusted university credentials. The most shocking revelation came when Agent Park shared evidence that Blake had murdered a student named Marcus Thompson who had threatened to expose the operation to authorities. Marcus had been found dead in his dorm room in what appeared to be a drug overdose, but Agent Park's investigation had uncovered evidence that Blake had forced Marcus to consume a lethal combination of substances after learning about his plans to contact the FBI. The staged suicide was so convincing that local police had closed the case without conducting a thorough investigation. Blake's insider knowledge of university security systems and administrative procedures had allowed him to stage Marcus's death perfectly, using his access to academic records to create a believable narrative of a struggling student who had turned to drugs to cope with academic pressure. The fake evidence of Marcus's drug use had been planted weeks before his murder, creating a paper trail that supported the suicide narrative when his body was discovered. Agent Park's revelation about Blake's connections to Russian crime syndicates added an international dimension to the investigation that transformed my personal revenge into a national security concern. The educational fraud operation was being used to create false identities for foreign operatives who needed legitimate-seeming academic credentials to infiltrate American institutions. Blake's greed had made him a willing collaborator with enemies of the United States. The physical danger I faced became real when Trevor attempted to intimidate Sophia with death threats delivered through anonymous phone calls and messages left on her apartment door. Blake had discovered our investigation through surveillance equipment he had placed in common areas around campus, and his desperation was leading to increasingly violent responses to threats against his operation. Agent Park arranged protective surveillance for both Sophia and me, acknowledging that Blake's willingness to commit murder made him extremely dangerous. Sophia's professional network included contacts at major newspapers and television networks who were interested in exposing the educational fraud scandal when the investigation was complete. The story had national implications that went far beyond my personal struggle with Blake, touching on issues of institutional corruption, foreign infiltration, and the commercialization of higher education that resonated with audiences across the country. The evidence we gathered painted a picture of systematic corruption that had been operating for years under the noses of university administrators who either didn't care or were actively complicit in the fraud. Blake's operation was possible because of institutional failures that prioritized reputation management over student safety and academic integrity. Our investigation would expose not just individual criminals, but the systemic problems that allowed them to thrive. Agent Park's coordination with international law enforcement agencies revealed that Blake's operation was part of a global network of educational fraud that operated in dozens of countries. The investigation would ultimately lead to arrests and prosecutions across multiple continents, making my personal battle with Blake part of a much larger fight against organized crime and institutional corruption. Blake's discovery of our investigation marked the beginning of the most terrifying period of my life, when the sociopathic criminal finally dropped all pretense of being my concerned brother. The surveillance device he had planted in Dr. Martinez's apartment was disguised as a smoke detector battery, sophisticated enough to capture both audio and video while remaining undetected for weeks. Blake had been monitoring every conversation, every piece of evidence we gathered, and every plan we made to expose his operation. The kidnapping happened on a Thursday evening when I was walking back from the library where Sophia and I had been analyzing financial records. Blake's associates grabbed me from behind as I crossed the poorly lit parking lot, using chloroform to knock me unconscious before loading me into a van that drove for what seemed like hours before stopping at an abandoned warehouse outside the city. When I regained consciousness, I was tied to a chair in a windowless room that smelled of rust and decay. Blake's appearance in that warehouse was like confronting a completely different person wearing my twin brother's face. The charming, manipulative performer had been replaced by a cold-blooded killer, who spoke about ending my life with the same casual tone he had once used to discuss weekend plans. "You always were too smart for your own good," he said, circling my chair like a predator examining prey. "But you were never smart enough to know when to stop." The revelation of his planned suicide, for me, was delivered with clinical detachment that made it clear Blake had been planning my murder for weeks. He had researched suicide methods, chosen a location that would seem plausible for someone in my desperate circumstances, and even written a suicide note that blamed my mental breakdown on guilt over falsely accusing my innocent brother. The note was typed on my laptop using passwords he had obtained through malware installed during one of his concerned brother visits. Blake's confession about Marcus Thompson's murder was delivered as a casual aside while he prepared the tools for my own death. "That idiot Marcus actually thought he could threaten me," Blake said, mixing chemicals with the kind of precision that suggested he had practiced the process. "He learned that some secrets are worth killing for, just like you're about to learn." The matter-of-fact way he described forcing Marcus to consume lethal drugs revealed a complete absence of empathy or remorse. The financial embezzlement Blake revealed during my captivity was staggering in scope, involving not just my college fund but years of systematic theft from our parents' business accounts. Blake had been creating fake investment opportunities and charity donations that funneled money directly into his personal accounts while maintaining the appearance of legitimate business expenses. Our father's company was effectively bankrupt, though the financial manipulation was so sophisticated that the theft hadn't been detected. My escape from the warehouse required using survival skills I had learned during childhood camping trips with our grandfather, combined with knowledge of chemical processes from my pre-med coursework. While Blake was distracted by a phone call with his Russian contacts, I managed to loosen the ropes binding my hands using friction against a sharp edge of the metal chair. The chloroform Blake had prepared for my murder became my weapon when I splashed it in his face, and fled through a window I had weakened during hours of careful work. Blake's framing of my disappearance as a mental breakdown was launched before I even reached safety, with carefully timed calls to our parents describing his discovery, that I had threatened suicide and vanished from Dr. Martinez's apartment. By the time I contacted Agent Park, Blake had already convinced our family that I was dangerous and potentially violent, requiring immediate intervention to prevent me from hurting myself or others. The private security team my parents hired to find me was composed of former law enforcement officers who believed they were searching for a mentally ill young woman who needed psychiatric help. Blake had provided them with psychological profiles and behavioral predictions that made me seem dangerous and unpredictable, ensuring that any contact with law enforcement would result in my immediate detention rather than protection. Evading both Blake's criminal associates and my parents' well-meaning investigators required constant movement and careful avoidance of areas where either group might expect to find me. Agent Park arranged safe houses through FBI resources, but the danger was constant and real. Blake's desperation had made him willing to risk everything to eliminate the threat I represented to his criminal empire and his relationship with our family. Sophia's coordination with Agent Park during this period kept the investigation moving forward, even while I remained in hiding. They documented Blake's increasing desperation through surveillance recordings that captured him making threats against our parents when they questioned his version of events. Blake's mask was finally slipping even in front of the family members who had supported him unconditionally. Blake's threat against our parents' lives represented the final escalation in his criminal behavior, revealing that he was willing to kill even the people who loved him most to protect his secrets. Recorded conversations captured Blake discussing contingency plans that involved staging our parents' deaths as a murder-suicide committed by their mentally ill daughter before she killed herself in remorse. The level of evil required to plan the murder of his own parents while maintaining his loving son facade was beyond anything I had imagined possible. The coordination between Blake and his Russian contacts became more frequent and desperate as the FBI investigation closed in on the criminal network. Communications intercepted by Agent Park revealed that Blake was planning to flee the country with stolen money and false identity documents, leaving behind a trail of bodies and destroyed families. His loyalty was ultimately to himself and his criminal partners rather than the family that had loved and supported him throughout his life. Agent Park's tactical team was preparing for simultaneous raids on Blake's operation, while maintaining my safety in protective custody, but the timing had to be perfect to prevent Blake from implementing his murder-suicide plan against our parents. The investigation had evolved from academic fraud to multiple counts of murder, international conspiracy, and domestic terrorism, making Blake one of the most dangerous criminals the FBI had pursued in recent years. The FBI raid took place during what was supposed to be a peaceful family gathering at our Connecticut estate, where Blake had manipulated our parents into hosting a dinner party to celebrate his successful semester and show support during my psychological crisis. Agent Park's tactical team coordinated the operation with precision that prevented Blake from accessing weapons or escape routes he had prepared throughout the house. The timing was deliberate, designed to capture Blake in the presence of family members who could witness his arrest and finally see the truth about their golden boy. Blake's immediate reaction to the FBI's arrival revealed the cold calculation that had always lurked beneath his charming exterior. Rather than showing surprise or confusion, his first instinct was to grab our mother as a human shield while shouting that I was the real criminal who had orchestrated an elaborate frame job against him. Even with federal agents pointing weapons at him, Blake continued his performance as the innocent victim of his unstable twin sister's vindictive lies. The evidence presentation that followed was overwhelming in both scope and detail, painting a picture of criminal sophistication that shocked everyone present. Agent Park methodically displayed financial records showing millions of dollars in fraud proceeds, recorded conversations revealing Blake's casual discussions of murder, and physical evidence linking him to Marcus Thompson's death. Our parents watched in stunned silence as their perfect son was exposed as a sociopathic killer who had been using their love and trust as shields for his criminal enterprise. Blake's final attempt to blame me, even while wearing handcuffs and facing multiple federal agents, demonstrated the depth of his pathological narcissism and complete inability to accept responsibility for his actions. Harper is the mastermind behind all of this, he shouted as agents led him toward their vehicles. She's been planning this frame job for months because she was jealous of my success. Don't let her manipulate you like she manipulated the FBI. His desperate lies fell on deaf ears as the evidence spoke louder than his increasingly frantic protests. Our parents' confrontation with the reality of Blake's crimes was heartbreaking to witness, involving the complete destruction of their understanding of their son and their family. My mother collapsed into a chair as Agent Park explained the evidence of Blake's embezzlement from my father's business, while my father stood in stunned silence as financial records revealed years of systematic theft disguised as legitimate business expenses. The golden boy they had protected and enabled had been destroying them financially while plotting the murders of his own family members. The recorded confessions Blake's accomplices provided in exchange for reduced sentences filled in details that made the scope of his criminal operation clear to everyone present. Trevor's testimony revealed Blake's leadership role in the international fraud network, while the corrupt graduate student described Blake's escalating violence against students who threatened to expose the operation. Each revelation stripped away another layer of the carefully constructed persona our parents had believed was their real son. My confrontation with our parents about their willingness to believe Blake over me was cathartic, but painful, addressing years of favoritism and manipulation that had enabled Blake's criminal behavior. You chose to believe his lies without even examining the evidence I brought you, I said, my voice steady despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm me. Your unconditional support for Blake made all of this possible. He used your love as a weapon against me and eventually against you too. My mother's breakdown was complete and devastating as she realized that her favoritism toward Blake had enabled a monster who was willing to kill his own family to protect his secrets. "I failed you," she sobbed, reaching for me with trembling hands. "I failed both of you." I was so proud of Blake's success that I never questioned where it came from, or why he always seemed to know exactly what to say. The guilt in her voice was genuine, but the damage to our relationship was severe and would require years to repair. My father's confrontation with bankruptcy was immediate and practical, as Agent Park explained that the business assets Blake had stolen would need to be recovered as evidence in the federal case. 25 years of building a successful company had been undone by his trusted son's systematic embezzlement, leaving my father facing financial ruin in addition to the emotional devastation of learning his son was a killer. The extended family's reaction to the truth was swift and dramatic, with relatives who had shunned me based on Blake's lies now sending desperate apologies and requests for forgiveness. Cousins who had been told I was dangerous called to express their horror at learning how thoroughly Blake had manipulated family relationships to protect his criminal operation. The holiday gatherings and family celebrations they had excluded me from suddenly felt hollow and meaningless. Blake's sentencing hearing 3 months later provided a final opportunity to see justice served against someone who had systematically destroyed innocent lives for personal gain. The federal judge imposed multiple life sentences without possibility of parole for murder, conspiracy, fraud, and terrorism-related charges. Blake's final statement to the court was a masterpiece of narcissistic deflection, blaming everyone from his parents to law enforcement to the corrupt system for his crimes while accepting no personal responsibility. My medical school applications were reinstated with full institutional support once the truth about Blake's frame job became public knowledge. Admissions committees that had previously rejected me based on character concerns now offered personal apologies and expedited review processes. The academic integrity I had fought so hard to protect was finally recognized and validated by the institutions that mattered most for my future career. The civil lawsuits against the universities that had enabled Blake's operation were settled for millions of dollars, providing compensation for the students whose lives had been damaged by academic fraud, and the families who had been deceived by fake credentials. The money couldn't undo the damage Blake had caused, but it provided resources for victims to rebuild their lives and educational institutions to implement better fraud prevention measures. Agent Park's testimony about my courage and persistence during the investigation helped establish my reputation as someone who was willing to sacrifice everything to expose corruption and protect innocent people. Law enforcement agencies and educational institutions began consulting with me about fraud prevention strategies, transforming my nightmare experience into expertise that could help others avoid similar situations. 6 months after Blake's sentencing, I was sitting in a lecture hall at Johns Hopkins Medical School, wearing scrubs that felt like a uniform of redemption, and listening to a professor explain the ethical responsibilities that come with the privilege of practicing medicine. The full scholarship I had received was based not just on my academic achievements, but on my demonstrated commitment to integrity even when telling the truth cost me everything. The admissions committee had written in their acceptance letter that they needed more doctors who would fight for what was right regardless of personal consequences. The rebuilding of my relationship with our parents was slow and painful, requiring family therapy sessions that forced all of us to confront years of dysfunction and favoritism that had enabled Blake's criminal behavior. My mother's guilt was overwhelming and sometimes counterproductive, leading to overcompensation that felt as uncomfortable as her previous favoritism toward Blake. My father struggled with practical matters like rebuilding his business, while processing the emotional devastation of learning that his trusted son had been systematically destroying the family he claimed to love. Dr. Sarah Hendricks, our family therapist, specialized in helping families recover from the trauma of discovering that a loved one was a sociopathic criminal. She explained that our healing process would involve not just forgiveness, but fundamental changes in how we communicated and made decisions as a family. Blake's manipulation was possible because your family culture prioritized harmony over truth, she told us during one particularly difficult session. Real healing requires learning to value honesty even when it creates conflict. My father's decision to include me as a partner in his new business venture was both a practical acknowledgement of his need for someone he could trust and an emotional gesture toward rebuilding our relationship. The construction consulting company we established together focused on educational facility design, allowing us to channel our shared experience with institutional failure into work that would help create better learning environments for future students. The volunteer work I began with fraud victims connected me with dozens of people whose lives had been destroyed by various forms of academic and financial fraud similar to Blake's operation. Their stories reminded me that my experience, while devastating, was part of a larger pattern of institutional failure and criminal exploitation that required systemic solutions rather than just individual justice. Working with these victims helped me process my own trauma while building expertise that made me a more effective advocate for reform. The foundation I established to help students wrongly accused of academic misconduct grew from my recognition that institutional investigations often prioritized reputation management over truth-seeking. The Harper Collins Foundation provided legal representation, investigative resources, and emotional support for students facing false accusations, ensuring they wouldn't have to navigate the system alone as I had been forced to do. Sophia Chen's Pulitzer Prize for her series exposing academic fraud networks was announced at a ceremony where she publicly credited my courage and persistence for making the investigation possible. Her articles had led to congressional hearings on educational security and federal legislation requiring stricter oversight of university financial systems. The personal nightmare Blake had created for me had ultimately contributed to systemic reforms that would protect thousands of future students. My new relationship with Dr. Marcus Williams, a fellow medical student whose name coincidentally connected him to Blake's murder victim, developed slowly and carefully as I learned to trust again after years of manipulation and betrayal. Marcus understood trauma and healing from both personal and professional perspectives, having overcome his own experiences with family dysfunction to pursue a career in psychiatry. His patience with my emotional walls and his commitment to honesty in all aspects of our relationship provided a foundation for building something real and lasting. The wedding planning process became an exercise in creating the family I wanted rather than recreating the family I had grown up in. The guest list included Dr. Martinez, Sophia Chun, Agent Park, and dozens of fraud victims I had worked with through the foundation, alongside the family members and friends who had supported me during the darkest period of my life. Blake's absence was notable but not mourning, representing the removal of toxicity, rather than the loss of something valuable. Our wedding day was held in the gardens of Johns Hopkins Hospital, where I would be completing my residency in emergency medicine, surrounded by people who had chosen to believe in truth and justice even when it was difficult or dangerous. The ceremony incorporated readings about the importance of integrity and courage, values that had been tested and proven during the years of fighting Blake's criminal operation. Blake's final letter from prison arrived 2 days before the wedding, filled with manipulative language designed to make me feel guilty for his imprisonment, and alone on my wedding day. The letter blamed everyone except himself for his situation, and requested a prison visit so he could explain the truth about what had really happened. I read the letter once, showed it to Marcus for his perspective, and then burned it in the fireplace without responding. Blake's opinion of my life choices was irrelevant to my happiness and success. The lesson I shared with the Foundation's victims about distinguishing between blood family and chosen family came from painful personal experience with betrayal and redemption. Being related to someone doesn't obligate you to accept their abuse or enable their destructive behavior, I told them during group therapy sessions. Real family are the people who support your growth and integrity even when it's inconvenient for them. My realization that surviving Blake's systematic betrayal had made me a stronger and more compassionate doctor was validated during my first year of residency, when I encountered patients whose symptoms were actually manifestations of abuse, fraud, or systematic oppression. My personal experience with being gaslit and manipulated gave me insights into patient psychology that my classmates found valuable and difficult to replicate through textbook study alone. The policy changes at universities across the country that resulted from our investigation included mandatory fraud prevention training, improved oversight of financial aid distribution, and whistleblower protection programs that would have made my original investigation safer and more effective. Congressional testimony I provided about institutional failures helped shape federal legislation that strengthened educational security requirements. As I stood in the emergency room treating my first critical patient as a licensed physician, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment of purpose and fulfillment. Blake's attempt to destroy my life had ultimately revealed strengths and convictions I never knew I possessed, connecting me with people and causes that gave my existence meaning beyond personal success. The family that had rejected me for telling the truth had been replaced by a community that valued integrity above comfort, creating a foundation for happiness that no amount of manipulation could undermine. Before I let you go, I need to ask you something important. Have you ever had someone in your family try to convince everyone that you were the problem when you were actually the one telling the truth? Drop a comment and tell me about your experience with family manipulation or betrayal. Your story might help someone else who's going through something similar right now. If this story hit close to home, please give it a like to help others find it who might need to hear this message. And definitely subscribe to my channel, because I share stories like this every week about people who fought back against injustice and won. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Most importantly, please share this video with someone who might be dealing with a toxic family member or feeling like nobody believes their side of the story. Sometimes people need to know they're not alone, and that truth really can triumph over manipulation. Thank you so much for watching and for believing that integrity matters, even when standing up for what's right comes at a tremendous personal cost. Your support means the world to me, and I'll see you in the next video where we'll explore another incredible story of resilience and justice. Until then, remember that your truth is valid, your courage matters, and you're stronger than you know.